Hey guys, tonight we are diving headfirst, or perhaps more accurately, easing gently into the sands of time to explore one of history's most perplexing and, dare I say, sleep-inducing mysteries, the lost script of the Indus Valley civilization. Imagine yourself standing on a sun-baked plain, the air thick with the dust of millennia. Around you, the spectral outlines of once mighty cities shimmer in the heat haze. Cities that thrived long before many other renowned ancient cultures even laid their first bricks. These metropolises were home to a people who built with astonishing precision, traded across vast distances, and then, almost poetically, vanished, leaving behind a script that continues to taunt and tantalize researchers to this very day. We're going to be sifting through the clues, the theories, and the sheer delightful stubbornness of this undeciphered language. Honestly, with the amount of detail we're about to wade into, you probably won't survive this awake. That is, which is, after all, the entire point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these little historical whispers travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself wandering through the silent, phantom streets of what we now call Harappa, or perhaps Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead Men. Spooky name, right? But back in its heyday, around 2500 BCE, this place was anything but dead. It was humming. A bustling urban center sprawling across the plains of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. This wasn't just a handful of mud huts, mind you. We're talking about one of the largest ancient urban civilizations. Easily on par with, if not more extensive than, its contemporaries in Egypt and Mesopotamia. In fact, the Indus Valley Civilization, or IVC as archaeologists affectionately call it, because archaeologists love a good acronym almost as much as they love a good trench, covered an area of over 1 million square kilometers. Think about that for a moment. A civilization of that sheer scale, flourishing when the pyramids of Giza were relatively new kids on the block. As you drift through these ancient avenues, the first thing that strikes you, apart from the oppressive, lingering heat that even millennia can't quite erase, is the order. These cities were meticulously planned. Streets laid out in a grid system, some running north-south, others east-west, intersecting at almost perfect right angles. It's the kind of urban planning that would make a modern city developer weep with envy, especially if they've ever tried to navigate the charming chaos of, say, old London or Boston. These weren't just paths worn down by foot traffic. These were intentional, engineered thoroughfares. Some were wide enough for 2 bullock carts to pass each other, laden with goods like cotton, timber, or perhaps those shiny, intriguing carnelian beads they were so famous for. You notice the houses, built from remarkably uniform, baked bricks, not sun-dried, mind you, but kiln-fired, which means they were durable, designed to last. It's a testament to their technological prowess. And these weren't just simple, one-room shacks for the most part. Many houses had multiple rooms, often centered around a courtyard, and some even boasted a second story. Perhaps the most astonishing feature for us, accustomed to our modern conveniences, is their sanitation system. You'd see covered drains running alongside the streets, carrying wastewater away from the homes. Individual houses often had their own bathing areas and, get this, toilets? Yes, toilets, connected to this sophisticated drainage network. It's a level of civic amenity that wouldn't be seen again in many parts of the world for thousands of years. You can almost imagine an ancient Harappan complaining to the city council about a blocked drain. Some things are truly timeless. Historians still argue whether these remarkably uniform cities, from Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro to Lothal and Dholavira, hundreds of kilometers apart, were controlled by a centralized state, twin capitals, or a collection of independent city-states that just happen to share an incredibly similar urban blueprint. The lack of ostentatious palaces or grand royal tombs, the kind you see in Egypt or Mesopotamia, certainly muddies the waters. Were they an egalitarian society? Or was their power structure just less flashy? Perhaps their rulers preferred good plumbing over giant statues of themselves? A sensible choice, if you ask me. One of the most iconic structures you might stumble upon in Mohenjo-Daro is the Great Bath. It's a large, rectangular, sunken pool, about 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and 2.4 meters deep, constructed from fine brickwork, with steps leading down into it from either end. The floor was made watertight using gypsum plaster, and some scholars suggest bitumen, that ancient sticky black stuff, was used in the construction, possibly as a sealant for the walls. Think of it as the world's oldest, or at least one of the oldest, public swimming pools, though it probably wasn't for your average Tuesday afternoon splash about. Most archaeologists believe it was used for ritual purification, a sacred space central to the city's religious or ceremonial life. You can almost hear the echoes of chants, the scent of ritual fires, the solemn atmosphere of a people connected to their beliefs in a very tangible, watery way. The sheer scale of their public works is impressive. Beyond the drains and the Great Bath, you'd see evidence of granaries, massive structures designed to store surplus food, indicating a well-organized agricultural system capable of supporting a large urban population. They built platforms to raise parts of the city, perhaps as a defense against floods from the mighty Indus River, which was both their lifeblood and a potential threat. It's this duality, this understanding and harnessing of natural forces, that seems to define much of their existence. They weren't just building cities, they were engineering environments. A quirky, or perhaps just incredibly practical, tidbit is the standardization of weights and measures across the entire civilization. Cubical weights made of chert have been found in excavations from one end of the IVC to the other, all conforming to a remarkably consistent system. It suggests a highly developed system of trade and commerce, where everyone agreed on how much a unit of grain or cotton actually was. No room for my thumb on the scale shenanigans here. It seems, or at least they tried to minimize it. The level of organization required for such uniformity across such a vast territory is, frankly, astounding for the Bronze Age. It implies a shared understanding, a common system that bound these disparate settlements together, even if the nature of their overarching political glue remains elusive. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long, spectral shadows across these ancient brick remains, you can't help but feel a profound sense of wonder, mixed with a touch of melancholy. These were people with a vision, with skills, with a complex society. They built cities that were marvels of their time, and in some ways, marvels even to us now. And yet, a crucial part of their story, their voice, remains silent, locked away in the little symbols they left behind. Symbols we'll begin to peer at more closely in our next section. For now, just let the scale of their achievements sink in. The quiet hum of a civilization that rose, flourished, and then, ever so silently, faded from view, leaving us with these magnificent, dusty blueprints of their world. You're now sifting through the layers of time, much like the early archaeologists did, brushing away the fine, persistent dust that coats everything in this ancient land. Remember those vast, meticulously planned cities we wandered through? The ones with the amazing drainage systems and the remarkably uniform bricks. Such an organized society, engaged in widespread trade and complex civic works, would surely need some way to keep records, to communicate beyond spoken words, to label goods, or perhaps to denote ownership or authority. It was this very thought that nudged early explorers and excavators to look closer, to search for more than just foundations and potsherds, and find things. They did. Imagine the scene, it's the mid-19th century, long before the full scale of the Indus civilization was understood. A British Army engineer and archaeologist, Sir Alexander Cunningham, a name that pops up quite a bit in Indian archaeology, comes across a peculiar little stone object. It's small, square, made of steatite, a type of soapstone that's easy to carve, and it bears the image of a bull, but not just any bull. This one is majestic, powerful, and above it, a short string of symbols, almost like tiny pictures, utterly unlike any script known in India at the time. Cunningham published a drawing of this seal in 1875. It was a curiosity, a little historical oddity. He noted the unknown script, but its true significance, its connection to a vast, forgotten civilization, remained dormant, a secret sleeping beneath the earth. It was like finding a single, exquisitely crafted cogwheel without knowing the intricate machine it once belonged to. Fast forward to the 1920s. Systematic excavations begin at Harappa, led by Rai Bahadur Dayaram Sani, and at Mohenjo-Daro under R. D. Banerjee, John Marshall, and others. As they dug deeper, moving past the upper layers of soil and debris, these mysterious markings began to emerge in greater numbers. They weren't just isolated finds anymore. They were appearing on hundreds, then thousands of similar small square or rectangular seals, each seal typically only about 2. 5 centimeters square was a miniature work of art. Most featured a beautifully carved animal, that striking bull, often with a single, prominent horn giving it a unicorn-like appearance. We'll definitely have to talk more about that unicorn later. But also elephants, rhinoceroses, zebu cattle, and sometimes more mythical-looking creatures. And above these animals, or sometimes in a separate register, was always a line of those enigmatic symbols. You can almost feel the thrill of those early excavators. You're carefully brushing dirt from a small, unassuming lump of clay or stone. It could be just another pebble, another fragment. But then, a distinct edge appears, a carved line. Your heart does a little flutter kick. More brushing, ever so gently. An animal begins to take shape. And then, those unmistakable signs. It's like an ancient message in a bottle. Finally seeing the light of day after 4,500 years. What did they mean? Who carved them? What secrets did they hold about the people who lived in these sophisticated cities? Each new seal was another piece of an enormous, captivating puzzle. But the script wasn't just confined to these beautiful seals. As more sites were unearthed across that vast territory we talked about, the same kinds of symbols started appearing on other objects too. You'd find them impressed onto clay tags, the kind that might have been attached to bales of goods, suggesting they were part of a system for trade and administration, like ancient shipping labels or quality control stamps. Imagine a Harappan merchant checking his inventory, write 10 bales of cotton from Lothal, all bearing the unicorn with spiky hairdo seal. Excellent. Some scholars even jest that these were the Bronze Age equivalent of a verified by Harappa ink sticker. Tiny copper tablets, thin and rectangular, also bore these inscriptions, sometimes with an animal on one side and script on the other, or script on both. These are less common than the seals, but add another dimension to the mystery. Were they amulets? Tokens, miniature official decrees nobody quite knows. You also find the script incised on pottery, sometimes as single signs, sometimes in short sequences. This is where it gets particularly interesting for those trying to understand the very origins of writing. Scholars continue to discuss whether the shortest inscriptions, sometimes just 1 or 2 signs found scratched onto the shoulders of large storage jars, truly represent linguistic content or are merely symbols. Perhaps potter's marks indicating who made the pot, or where it was made, or even what it was supposed to contain. A bit like a very, very minimalist label. It's a fascinating debate. When does a simple mark become a sign? And when does a sign become part of a full-fledged script capable of recording language? A quirky tidbit for you. Some of the earliest examples of what might be Proto-Indus signs have been found on pottery dating back to the early Harappan period, around 3500 to 2700 BCE, even before the big cities reached their peak. These are often just simple, graffiti-like scratches. Are these the baby steps of the Indus script? The experimental doodles before it matured into the more formal system we see on the seals? It's like looking at a child's first scribbles and wondering if they'll grow up to write a prize-winning novel. The potential is there, but the connection isn't always clear-cut. The material most commonly associated with the script is, of course, that steatite used for the seals. It was often fired after carving, which made it harder and whiter, giving the finished seals a rather elegant look. But you also see inscriptions on terracotta, bone, ivory though rare, and those copper tablets. The variety of materials suggests the script was used in different contexts, for different purposes. The seals themselves, with their intricate carvings, were likely used to make impressions on soft clay. You can imagine a lump of clay being pressed onto a jar or a document, though. Frustratingly, no documents on perishable materials like palm leaf or cloth have survived. If they ever existed, the impression would then serve as a mark of ownership, a guarantee of authenticity, or perhaps an official authorization. They were, in essence, the ancient equivalent of a signature or a company logo, compact and instantly recognizable, at least to those who knew the system. You can almost picture a bustling Harappan marketplace, with officials stamping clay tags on goods, ensuring everything was above board, no counterfeit unicorn seals allowed. So, as these artifacts accumulated, from the first curious bull seal noted by Cunningham to the thousands of objects unearthed by later archaeologists, the existence of a unique indigenous writing system for this great Bronze Age civilization became undeniable, and that's why these weren't just random doodles or pretty pictures. The repetition of signs, the distinct sequences, the clear association with administrative and trade objects, it all pointed to a structured system. The challenge, of course, was that while the script was now physically present, its meaning remained completely opaque. It whispered of a complex society, of trade and belief, but its actual words were lost in the silence of the centuries. The stage was set for the next act, the attempts to coax these silent symbols into speech. So, you're now surrounded by these little artifacts we talked about in the last section. The steatite seals, the copper tablets, the pottery fragments, all whispering with these tiny, enigmatic markings. You've seen how they emerged from the earth, bringing with them the tantalizing promise of a lost voice. But what does the script actually look like? What are its defining features if you were an ancient Harappan scribe? Or perhaps just someone trying to read a public notice, assuming they had those, maybe announcing the weekly chariot races or a special on fermented barley juice? What would you be dealing with? Take one of those seals in your hand. Virtually, of course. Feel its smooth, cool surface. Notice the crispness of the carved lines. The script itself is usually found in a single line, or sometimes two, typically running above the depiction of an animal, like that famous unicorn or a sturdy bull. The signs are small, intricate, and possess a certain elegance. They're not rough scrawls, they are deliberate and carefully executed. It's a visual language that seems both alien and strangely familiar, with shapes that sometimes resemble people, animals, or everyday objects, mixed with more abstract geometric forms. One of the first things scholars try to determine with any unknown script is its direction of writing. Do you read it from left to right, like English, or right to left, like Arabic or Hebrew, or maybe even top to bottom, like traditional Chinese or Japanese with the Indus script? The general consensus, and this is a pretty solid mainstream historical fact, is that it was typically written from right to left. How do they know this? Well, sometimes you see signs on the left-hand side of an inscription looking a bit squashed, as if the scribe was running out of space. You can almost picture them, oh, drat, nearly at the edge of the seal. Better squeeze this last fishy-looking thing in. Other times, if there are two lines, the second line might start slightly indented on the right, under the beginning of the first line. On rare occasions, you might even find examples of boustrophodon writing, a wonderful word which means as the ox plows. This is where the direction of writing alternates with each line, right to left on the first line, then left to right on the second, then right to left again. Trying to read that would definitely keep you on your toes, like watching a very slow, very confusing tennis match. Now, let's talk about the cast of characters in this silent drama, the signs themselves. This is where things get really interesting, and also a bit headache-inducing for anyone trying to create a definitive list. The exact number of unique Indus signs is still a subject of considerable discussion, with estimates ranging from around 400 to over 600. Why the uncertainty? Well, it's not always easy to tell if a slightly different looking symbol is a completely new sign, a minor variation like different handwriting styles, or perhaps two existing signs joined together. Think about how a lowercase a can look quite different depending on the font or handwriting, but it's still an a. Or how we combine letters like and e into arye in some words. The Indus scribes, it seems, were also fond of this. This brings us to a quirky little feature, the existence of ligatured signs. This is where two, or sometimes even three, basic signs are combined or modified to create a new composite symbol. Maybe they'd add some extra strokes to a basic sign, or join two distinct signs side by side to form a single unit. This combinatorial creativity makes cataloging the script a bit like trying to count all the possible Lego brick combinations. The number gets very large, very quickly. It also raises questions about what these ligatures mean. Is it a new sound, a combined meaning, or just a scribe showing off their calligraphy skills? If only they'd left behind a Harappan-style guide for scribes, edition 1.0. The signs themselves are a fascinating mix. Many appear to be pictographic, meaning they look like recognizable objects. You'll see signs that clearly resemble a fish. In fact, fish signs are among the most common, leading to endless speculation. Were they a coastal people obsessed with seafood? Did fish also mean something else, like star or god as it does in some other cultures? There are signs that look like a person, sometimes carrying something, or in a particular posture. You see bird-like signs, insect-like signs, plant motifs, and various tools or implements. Then there are more abstract, geometric shapes, circles, squares, triangles, ovals, grids, and various combinations of lines. It's like a visual vocabulary drawn from the world around them, but also from a system of abstract representation. Some people describe it as looking a bit like a very sophisticated set of early emojis, and while that's a bit anachronistic, it captures that visual, almost symbolic quality. The average Indus inscription is quite short, typically only about 5 signs long. The longest known continuous inscription, found on a large wooden board that might have been a public sign at Dolavira, has about 17 symbols in a row, forming a sequence of 10 unique signs. This brevity is one of the biggest challenges for decipherment. Short texts give you less context, fewer patterns to work with. Imagine trying to learn English if all you had were 5-word phrases like big sale at market today or beware of the griffin. You might get a general idea, but fluency would be a long way off. Are these short inscriptions names, titles, dedications, or perhaps just labels for goods? You'll also notice that the signs within an inscription are usually neatly arranged in a line, without clear word dividers like spaces or punctuation. This means you don't immediately know where one word ends and another begins, adding another layer of complexity. It's like reading a sentence with all the space taken out. You can eventually figure it out, but it takes more effort. The signs themselves are also remarkably standardized across the vast geographical spread of the Indus Valley civilization. A fish sign found in Harappa looks pretty much the same as a fish sign found hundreds of kilometers away in Lothal. This uniformity, much like their bricks and city plans that we discussed earlier, suggests a well-established and consistent system of writing, taught and maintained over centuries. No room for rogue scribes inventing their own funky fish symbols, it seems. So, as you gaze upon these lines of script, with their right-to-left flow, their cast of around 400 main characters plus numerous ligatures and variations, and their tantalizingly short messages, you begin to appreciate the unique nature of this linguistic puzzle. It's not quite like Egyptian hieroglyphs with their mix of phonetic and logographic signs. It's not quite like Mesopotamian cuneiform with its wedge-shaped marks. It stands apart, a distinct creation of the Indus people. The visual appeal is undeniable. The intellectual challenge, immense. What were they trying to say with these beautifully carved fish, these stick figures, these enigmatic grids? The script holds its secrets close, but its very structure gives us clues and headaches in equal measure. So you're now gazing at these curious lines of script, those neat right-to-left sequences of fish, people, and geometric squiggles we just talked about. You've got a sense of their unique style, the sheer number of signs, and the maddening brevity of the inscriptions. Now, picture yourself as one of the pioneering scholars in the early to mid-20th century. The initial flush of excitement from the discovery of these artifacts, like those Cunningham first noted, is still in the air. But now the hard work begins. It's like being handed a beautifully wrapped gift box, only to find it's locked, and no one has the key. The urge to peek inside, to understand what those Harappans were trying to tell us, was irresistible. The first wave of attempts to crack the Indus script was, as you can imagine, a mixture of brilliant intuition, painstaking comparison, and, let's be honest, a fair bit of hopeful guesswork. Remember, these scholars were venturing into completely uncharted territory. They had a newly discovered script from a newly understood civilization, with no obvious links to any known language family at the outset. It was like trying to solve an incredibly complex Sudoku puzzle where half the numbers are missing, and you're not even sure if it is Sudoku. Many early efforts naturally gravitated towards comparing the Indus signs with other ancient scripts. This is a common starting point in decipherment. If you can find visual similarities between unknown signs and signs in a known script whose language is understood, you might have a foothold. Scholars like Stephen Langdon, who worked extensively on Mesopotamian cuneiform, and G.R. Hunter, who produced one of the earliest comprehensive studies of the script, meticulously cataloged the signs and explored potential links. Was it related to Proto-Elamite, an early script from neighboring Persia, or perhaps Sumerian cuneiform? After all, there was evidence of trade between the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia. Perhaps they'd borrowed more than just carnelian beads and cotton. You can imagine them, late at night, surrounded by flickering lamplight, poring over charts of signs, tracing resemblances. Their desks piled high with academic papers and copious notes, fueled by endless cups of strong tea and an even stronger desire for a breakthrough. The challenge, of course, is that visual similarity can be a siren song. Two signs from different scripts might look alike purely by chance, especially with simpler geometric shapes. Or they might be false friends, looking similar but having entirely different phonetic values or meanings. It's like assuming that because a Spanish embarazada looks like embarrassed, it means the same thing, a mistake that can lead to some rather awkward situations, or in this case, some rather off-the-mark decipherments. There was, and to some extent still is, considerable debate about the fundamental nature of the script. Was it alphabetic, with each sign representing a single sound, like our A, B? Say, was it syllabic, where each sign stood for a syllable like bay, B, bo, or was it logosyllabic, a mixed system like Egyptian hieroglyphs, using signs for whole words or concepts as well as sounds? The number of signs, remember that figure of around 400 to 600 distinct symbols we discussed, suggested it probably wasn't purely alphabetic, which would usually have far fewer signs, nor purely logographic like early Chinese, which would have many thousands. This pointed towards a syllabic or logosyllabic system, but that still left a lot of room for interpretation, and these assumptions heavily influenced those initial approaches. Now, not all early attempts were models of academic rigor. The allure of being the one to crack such an ancient code sometimes led to, shall we say, more creative interpretations. This is where our quirky tidbit comes in. Some decipherments were based on rather superficial resemblances, where a scholar might pick a known language, often one they were familiar with or one that fit a particular historical narrative, and then try to force the Indus signs to fit its phonetic values. One of the most notorious examples was uh, Waddell, an eccentric figure who, in the 1920s, confidently declared he had deciphered the script as an early form of Sumerian, and that the Indus people were, in fact, Sumerians who were ancestors of the Aryans. His translations involved identifying Indus kings and reading historical chronicles from the seals. Unfortunately, his methods were, to put it mildly, not sound. He'd pick signs, assign them phonetic values from Sumerian somewhat arbitrarily, and if they didn't quite fit, he'd tweak them or even read them in different directions until he got something that sounded vaguely like what he wanted. It's a bit like trying to make a grocery list read like Shakespeare by squinting at it and changing a few letters here and there. While such attempts are now footnotes in the history of the decipherment effort, they serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of preconceived notions and a lack of systematic methodology. You definitely need more than just enthusiasm and a conveniently flexible approach to sign identification. The early genuine scholars, however, were laying important groundwork. They were meticulously copying and cataloging the inscriptions, noting the frequency of different signs, their positions within texts, and the symbols they appeared with. This kind of careful, systematic data collection is crucial, even if the immediate breakthrough remains elusive. It's like building a massive database of clues for future detectives. They were also grappling with fundamental questions. Were the signs always read in the same direction? Mostly, yes, right to left, as we established. Were there regional variations? Surprisingly few, given the size of the IVC. What did the animal figures on the seals signify in relation to the script? Were they part of the message or separate identifiers? You can feel the frustration mounting. Imagine spending years of your life dedicated to these tiny symbols, hoping for that eureka moment, that sudden flash of insight that would make it all fall into place. But the script remained stubbornly silent. The lack of a bilingual inscription, like the Rosetta Stone, which was so crucial for Egyptian hieroglyphs, was a massive roadblock. With no parallel text in a known language, you're essentially trying to learn a language and its writing system simultaneously, from scratch, with only very short examples. It's like trying to learn Klingon armed only with a few dozen phrases from Star Trek, most of which seem to be about honor or fighting. Good luck ordering a quiet cup of tea with that. Despite the dead ends and the sometimes wild goose chases, these early attempts were not entirely in vain. They highlighted the unique challenges posed by the Indus script, refined the questions that needed to be asked, and slowly built up a corpus of inscriptions and analytical tools. They were the pioneers who hacked their way through the initial jungle of unknown symbols. Clearing a path, however winding, for those who would follow, they showed that this wasn't going to be an easy puzzle to solve. The Harappans, it seemed, had guarded their secrets well, perhaps even unintentionally planning the ultimate long-term historical head-scratcher for millennia of future scholars. One almost wonders if some ancient scribe bored with stamping seals thought, "Let's make this extra tricky for anyone trying to read it in 4,000 years." Probably not. But the challenge they left behind is certainly a monumental one. You've now weathered the storm of those initial, often frustrating, attempts at decipherment we explored in the last section. You've seen scholars wrestling with this silent script, armed with little more than comparisons and sheer determination. But let's pause for a moment and delve deeper into a fundamental question that puzzled those early researchers and continues to be a core part of the enigma. What kind of signs are we actually looking at? Are these little marks, pictures of things, representations of sounds, or symbols for abstract ideas? Or, more likely, some combination of all three? Understanding this is like trying to figure out the basic rules of a game before you can even hope to play it. Think about the writing systems you know. English uses an alphabet, where each letter broadly corresponds to a sound, a phoneme. Chinese, traditionally, uses characters that can represent whole words or concepts. Logograms, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, as we've touched on, were a fascinating mix. using pictograms that could stand for an object, a sound, or even act as a determinative, a silent sign clarifying the meaning of preceding signs. So, where does the Indus script fit on this spectrum? Remember that crucial detail from Section 3, the number of unique signs, estimated to be between 400 and 600. This number is a huge clue. If the script were purely alphabetic, like our A, B, C, you'd expect a much smaller set of signs, typically between 20 and 40. If it were purely logographic, where every single word has its own unique symbol, you'd be looking at many thousands of signs, like in early Chinese. The Indus script, with its several hundred signs, sits comfortably in the middle. This leads most scholars to the mainstream conclusion that the script is likely logosyllabic. This means it probably used a core set of signs representing whole words or concepts, logograms, and another set of signs representing syllables. Syllabograms. Think sounds like bei, di, mu, sha. It might also have included ideograms, which are symbols that represent an idea or concept directly, rather than a specific word or sound. It's a flexible, but also rather complex system. Now, imagine yourself as an Indus scribe. You need to jot down 2 large jars of barley for the temple. How do you do it? If your script is partly pictographic, you might use a sign that looks like a jar. Perhaps with some modification for large jar, you might have a specific symbol for barley, or perhaps a more general one for grain. The number 2 could be represented by 2 strokes, a common feature in many ancient scripts, and temple could be a specific logogram, or perhaps an ideogram representing a sacred enclosure. Trying to convey a complex philosophical idea, like my existential dread is amplified by the ephemeral nature of reality, using only pictures of fish in pots would be challenging. You might end up with a sad fish, empty jar, confused stick figure type of message. Good for a chuckle. Less good for a theological discourse. Many of the Indus signs do look pictorial. We've mentioned the ubiquitous fish, the human-like figures, the birds, plants, and various objects. It's tempting to assume that a fish sign simply means fish, and in some cases, it might. This is the essence of a logogram. One sign, one word or core concept. But language is a slippery beast. Sometimes, a picture of something can be used to represent the sound of that word, which can then be used to write other unrelated words that happen to sound similar. This is called the rebus principle, and it's a key way that pictographic scripts can evolve to represent spoken language more fully. Here's a classic, though purely hypothetical. Example of the rebus principle in English. Imagine you want to write the word belief. You could draw a picture of a bee and then a picture of a leaf. Bee leaf. Get it? It's a bit like a visual pun. This is where our quirky tidbit for this section comes in. Many researchers speculate that the Indus script made extensive use of the rebus principle. A key ongoing discussion revolves around whether certain frequently occurring signs, like that ever-present fish symbol, function primarily as logograms for fish, or if they acquired phonetic values through the rebus principle to represent other similar-sounding words in the Harappan language. For instance, if the Harappan word for fish was mina, a word for fish in some Dravidian languages, which, as we'll see later, is a leading candidate for the Indus language family, and the word for star or planet also sounded similar, then the fish sign might have been used to write star as well. Suddenly, those seals aren't just about ichthyology, they could be about astrology or celestial deities. This is, of course, highly speculative without knowing the underlying language, but it's a plausible mechanism for how such a script could function. Some signs might also have acted as determinatives. Those silent helpers we mentioned in Egyptian hieroglyphs. These are signs that aren't pronounced but give you a clue about the category of the word they're attached to. For example, a word followed by a person sign might indicate a name or a profession. A word followed by a place sign, if one existed, would denote a location. This would be incredibly helpful in a script with many signs that could be either logograms or syllabograms. The challenge is that without knowing the underlying language, it's incredibly difficult to prove these hypotheses. We can see patterns. We can see that certain signs appear frequently, others rarely. Some signs tend to appear at the beginning of inscriptions, others at the end. Some signs often cluster together. This statistical analysis, one which we'll touch on more later, can give us clues about the grammar and structure of the script, but not direct meanings. Imagine trying to decipher a modern shopping list written entirely in emojis by someone from a completely different culture. A picture of bread and milk might be straightforward. But what about, is that strawberry party money, meaning they need to buy strawberries for a party and get cash? Or is it berries are a joyful investment? Or maybe it's a reminder to buy Strawberry Joy brand lottery tickets. Without understanding the conventions and the language of the emoji user, you're just making educated guesses. The Indus script is a far more complex version of this problem. Were they trying to make their tax records look like profound mystical statements? Or were their mystical statements just surprisingly short and full of pictures of livestock? It's hard to say. So, you're left contemplating these signs, some clearly pictorial, others abstract. Are they concrete nouns, verbs of action, adjectives describing qualities, or phonetic building blocks to spell out words, syllable by syllable? The most likely answer is all of the above. The Indus script was probably a flexible, multi-purpose tool, capable of conveying meaning in several different ways simultaneously. The scribes who used it would have understood these conventions intuitively, just as you intuitively understand the difference between reading a word alphabetically and interpreting an emoji. For us, millennia later, untangling these different functions without a user manual is the monumental task that continues to absorb and, yes, occasionally frustrate the brightest minds in the field. Each sign is a tiny window, clouded by time, and we're all peering through, hoping to catch a glimpse of the world behind it. You've been pondering the very nature of those intriguing Indus signs. Were they pictures, sounds, or ideas? We landed on the likelihood of a logosyllabic system, a versatile mix, as we explored in the last section. But this begs an even bigger question: if these signs represent parts of a spoken language, which language was it? This is where the detective work truly kicks into high gear, and where one of the most prominent and enduring theories takes center stage: the Dravidian connection. Imagine, if you will, the vast linguistic landscape of the Indian subcontinent. Today, it's a vibrant tapestry of language families, primarily Indo-Aryan languages in the north, like Hindi, Bengali, and Punjabi, and Dravidian languages in the south, like Tamil and Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam. And the Dravidian hypothesis proposes that the language spoken by the Harappans, the language captured in those enigmatic symbols, belonged to the Dravidian family, or perhaps an ancestor of it, often referred to as Proto-Dravidian. It's like finding out that an ancient, unlabeled family portrait actually contains the great-great-great-grandparents of people you know today. This isn't just a wild guess plucked from thin air. It's a theory that has been meticulously developed and passionately argued by some of the most respected scholars in the field for decades, including figures like the Finnish Indologist Asko Parpala and the Indian epigraphist Iravatham Mahadevan. They, and many others, have dedicated their careers to sifting through linguistic and archaeological evidence, looking for those telltale connections. One of the most compelling pieces of circumstantial evidence, and a mainstream historical fact you'll often hear cited, is the existence of the Brahui language. Brahui is a Dravidian language spoken today by a significant population in Balochistan, a region of Pakistan which lies to the west of the core Indus Valley area, and also in parts of Afghanistan and Iran. It's a geographical outlier, an island of Dravidian speech surrounded by Indo-Aryan and Iranian languages. Think of Brahui as that one cousin who moved far away from the ancestral homeland, but still shows up at family reunions. Linguistically speaking, reminding everyone of deeper, older connections. The presence of Brahui, so relatively close to where the Indus civilization once thrived, suggests that Dravidian languages might have once been spoken over a much wider area of northwestern South Asia, before the later arrival and spread of Indo-Aryan languages. So, how do proponents of the Dravidian hypothesis try to link it to the script? Well, remember our discussion about the rebus principle from the previous section, using a picture of one thing to represent the sound of its name, and then using that sound to write another word. This is where things get particularly clever, and also where that quirky, oft-cited fish sign comes back into play. In many Dravidian languages, the word for fish is mayan, or something very similar. Intriguingly, mine also sounds very much like or is identical to the word for star or planet in these languages. So the theory goes, perhaps the incredibly common fish symbol on Indus seals isn't always just about fish. Perhaps it was used as a rebus to write mayan, meaning star or deity, as stars were often deified. Suddenly, the seal with a fish sign might not be a fisherman's tag, but could refer to a celestial body, an astronomical observation, or a god. Imagine those ancient Harappans, meticulously carving a fish symbol, perhaps thinking about their evening meal and in doing so, inadvertently leaving a linguistic breadcrumb trail for researchers some 4 millennia down the line. It's a beautiful, elegant hypothesis. Researchers have taken this approach and tried to apply it to other signs and sequences as well. They reconstruct words from Proto-Dravidian, the hypothetical ancestor of modern Dravidian languages, and then look for Indus signs that could pictorially represent a word that sounds like a part of the reconstructed target word. For example, if they hypothesize a particular sequence of signs might represent a name or a title, they would try to find Dravidian words that fit structurally and semantically, and see if the signs could be interpreted as rebuses for those words. This often involves intricate linguistic analysis and a deep understanding of Dravidian etymology. It's like trying to solve a crossword puzzle where the clues are in one ancient language and the answers are in another. And you only have pictures to work with for the clues. Of course, this approach has its challenges. Despite numerous proposed Dravidian interpretations for individual signs and short sequences, the lack of definitive proof means that historians and linguists continue to debate the strength and extent of the Dravidian connection. Without a bilingual text on our old friend, the missing Rosetta Stone, it's very difficult to confirm these readings conclusively. Critics point out that with enough ingenuity, you can often find homophones or near homophones in many languages, and that some proposed rebus readings can seem a bit stretched. It's a bit like linguistic speed dating. You see a potential match between a sign and a sound. There's a hopeful glance moment, but will it lead to a long-term, verifiable commitment? That's the million-dollar question. Furthermore, the time depth is enormous. We're talking about a gap of thousands of years between the Indus civilization and the earliest written records of Dravidian languages like Old Tamil, which appear in the early centuries CE. Languages change significantly over such vast timescales. While linguists can reconstruct Proto-Dravidian with a good degree of confidence, it's still a reconstruction. Despite these hurdles, the Dravidian hypothesis remains one of the most robust and actively researched avenues. The structural features of how signs are ordered in Indus inscriptions have also been analyzed by scholars like Asko Parpola, who argue that they align with what you might expect from a Dravidian language's grammar, for instance. Dravidian languages are typically agglutinative, meaning words are formed by stringing together morphemes or meaningful units, and they are usually verb final. If an Indus inscription reads, hypothetically, jar fish man, and if jar meant great, fish as a rebus meant star or god, and man indicated a person or a title, a Dravidian structure might allow for a plausible interpretation like servant of the great god X or official of the star Y. This kind of structural analysis, looking at sign order and statistical patterns, adds another layer to the argument, moving beyond just individual sign interpretations. So as you ponder these ancient symbols, you can imagine the layers of meaning they might hold if the Dravidian key truly fits the lock. The bustling Harappan cities we wandered through earlier might have echoed with the sounds of a language whose distant relatives are still spoken by hundreds of millions of people today. It's a tantalizing prospect, a thread of linguistic continuity stretching back into the Bronze Age. The debate is far from over, but the Dravidian hypothesis offers a compelling narrative, a framework through which those silent fish, jars, and figures might one day speak with a familiar accent. You've just navigated the compelling currents of the Dravidian hypothesis. That major theory suggesting the Indus script echoes the ancient ancestors of South Indian languages, full of those clever fish star rebuses we talked about. It's a strong contender, for sure, like the front runner in a very, very long race. But in the grand, often perplexing arena of historical linguistics and script decipherment, it's rarely a one-horse race. Other linguistic families have also stepped into the ring, vying for the title of the language of the Harappans. So, let's you and I wander down these alternative paths, exploring the other contenders for the tongue behind those mysterious symbols. One of the most significant alternative proposals, and one that often sparks quite a bit of heated discussion, is the Indo-Aryan hypothesis. This theory suggests that the language of the Indus Valley civilization was an early form of Indo-Aryan, perhaps a precursor to Vedic Sanskrit, the ancient language of the Vedas. Some of the oldest scriptures of Hinduism, or even an early stage of Vedic Sanskrit itself. Proponents of this view point to certain cultural continuities they perceive between the Indus Valley civilization and later Vedic culture, and they attempt to interpret Indus signs and sequences using Indo-Aryan roots and grammar. It's like suggesting that instead of being distant cousins to South Indian languages, the Harappan tongue was actually an early grandparent of languages like Hindi or Bengali. The challenges for the Indo-Aryan hypothesis, however, are considerable. Mainstream historical linguistics generally places the arrival of Indo-Aryan speakers in the Indian subcontinent somewhat later than the peak of the Indus civilization. The Rig Veda, the oldest Vedic text, describes a society that appears more pastoral and less urbanized than the sophisticated city dwellers of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Also, features of the Indus script, like its predominantly right-to-left directionality we discussed in Section 3, and its structural characteristics as revealed by statistical analyses, don't always align easily with what we know of early Indo-Aryan languages. For example, early Indo-Aryan languages were inflected changing word endings to show grammatical function, and it's debated how well the typically short Indus inscriptions could represent such a linguistic structure if the script were primarily logosyllabic. The debate over the linguistic affiliation of the Indus script is far from settled, with proponents of various theories pointing to different structural features, alleged loanwords, or archaeological interpretations to support their claims. Trying to make a definitive case for Indo-Aryan often involves reinterpreting archaeological evidence or proposing very early dates for Indo-Aryan presence, which remains contentious among scholars. Then you have the Munda languages. This is a smaller language family, spoken today by various tribal groups primarily in central and eastern India. Think of languages like Santali or Mandari. Some researchers have proposed that the Indus language might have belonged to this family, or a language related to it. The argument here is often based on the idea that Munda languages were once more widespread, and that some Munda words for agricultural terms, or local flora and fauna, might have ancient roots. Attempts have been made to connect Indus signs, particularly those depicting local animals or agricultural tools, to Munda vocabulary. However, like the Indo-Aryan theory, the Munda hypothesis faces challenges in terms of providing comprehensive and systematic decipherment of inscriptions, and it hasn't gained the same level of broad support as the Dravidian theory. It's a bit like a talented underdog in the linguistic talent show. Passionate fans, but still waiting for that big breakthrough performance. Beyond these specific language families, there's the ever-intriguing possibility of what we might call language X. This is the placeholder for an unknown language. Perhaps a language isolate a language with no known living relatives, like Basque in Europe or Ainu in Japan, or a member of a language family that has since gone entirely extinct. Calling it language X makes it sound a bit like a superhero's secret identity, but it's more like a linguistic ghost, We see tantalizing traces, but the substance remains elusive. If the Indus language belongs to this category, decipherment becomes exponentially more difficult. Without related languages to provide clues about grammar, vocabulary, or phonology, you're essentially working in a vacuum. The history of language is littered with lost families and isolates. It's entirely plausible the Harappans spoke a language that simply didn't survive in any recognizable form. This would be the ultimate linguistic cold case. You might also encounter more specific, sometimes rather imaginative, attempts to link the Indus script to a whole host of other languages from around the world. From Sumerian, as we touched upon with early attempts like Waddell's, to Easter Island's Rongorongo script, or even languages of ancient Crete. These theories often rely on superficial resemblances between a few signs or very speculative historical connections, and generally lack the rigorous methodological backing or broad scholarly acceptance of the Dravidian or even the mainstream Indo-Aryan proposals. It's easy to find patterns if you look hard enough, but proving they're not just coincidences is the real challenge. Sometimes it feels like the Indus script is a sort of linguistic Rorschach test. What you see in it can sometimes reveal more about your own background and expectations than about the script itself. Imagine if the script was some sort of elaborate, ancient tourist phrasebook, designed to help Harappan traders communicate basic ideas in multiple languages across their vast trade network. Greetings. How many? Excellent pottery. Beware the griffin. It might explain why it's so hard to pin down to a single language family. Okay, that's a joke. There's no evidence for that, but it's a fun thought on a sleepy evening. The reality is that each proposed linguistic affiliation brings its own set of assumptions about the Harappan people, their origins, their culture, and their relationships with neighboring regions. Scholars defending their pet language theory can sometimes get quite animated, a bit like sports fans arguing over whose team is the best. There's a lot of passion, detailed knowledge of their chosen side's strengths, and often very few conceded points to the opposition. But this rigorous debate, this constant testing of hypotheses against the available evidence, the script itself, archaeological findings, comparative linguistics, is exactly how science and historical research inch forward, even if it's at a pace that would make a snail impatient. So, as you drift, you can picture these different linguistic keys being tried on that ancient, stubborn lock of the Indus script. The Dravidian key seems to fit some of the tumblers, more so than others. The Indo-Aryan key is held by a vocal group who believe it's the right one. Despite some fitting issues, the Munda key is there, less commonly tried but still a possibility. And then there's that intriguing, perhaps slightly daunting, language X key, the one that might be perfectly shaped but is frustratingly invisible to us. The search continues because the allure of finally hearing the Harappans speak in their own words is just too strong to resist. You've waded through the swirling waters of linguistic debate, considering whether those Harappan scribbles might be Dravidian, Indo-Aryan, Munda, or perhaps some enigmatic language X we explored in the last couple of sections. It's enough to make your head spin, like trying to follow multiple conversations at a very loud, very ancient party. So, what do you do when the traditional linguistic keys don't immediately pop the lock? You turn to the cool, dispassionate world of numbers, patterns, and computers. Welcome to the realm of statistical approaches to the Indus script. Even if you can't read a single word, you can still learn a lot about a script by looking at how its signs behave. Think of it like this: if you were given a long text in an unknown language, you could still count how many times each letter or symbol appears, which symbols like to hang out together, and which ones prefer to start or end a sequence. This is precisely what researchers started doing with the Indus script, initially by hand, and later with the help of computers. It's painstaking work, especially those early manual efforts. Imagine meticulously counting thousands upon thousands of tiny, individual signs from photographs and drawings of seals. It's the kind of intensely focused task that would make even the most dedicated ancient scribe consider a career change to something more thrilling, like, say, watching bricks bake. One of the pioneering efforts in this area, a mainstream historical fact worth noting, came from a Soviet team of researchers in the 1960s, led by Yuri Knorozov, a name already famous for his crucial contributions to the decipherment of Mayan hieroglyphs. They, along with later scholars from India, Finland, Japan, and the US, began to apply computational methods to the growing corpus of Indus inscriptions. They fed the data, all those sequences of signs from the seals, tablets, and pottery we've discussed, into computers and started asking some fundamental questions. What did they find? Well, for starters, they confirmed that the script is not just a random jumble of pretty pictures. The signs occur with very different frequencies. Some signs are super common hello again, fishy friend, while others are quite rare, appearing only a handful of times. This is typical of real languages. Think how often E or A appear in English compared to Z or X. If all the Indus signs appeared with roughly equal frequency, it might suggest they weren't encoding language, but were perhaps just decorative symbols or a limited set of emblems. They also looked at engrams. That's a fancy term for sequences of signs. They analyzed pairs of signs, bigrams, triplets, trigrams, and so on. They discovered that certain signs have a strong preference for appearing next to other specific signs, while they almost never appear next to others. Again, this is a hallmark of language. In English, while quo is almost always followed by u, you don't often see quo followed by z. These patterns of association, or collocation, reveal underlying rules, a kind of grammar or syntax, even if you don't know what the words mean. So, when the statistical analysis showed that, say, the jar sign often appeared before the fish sign, but rarely after the bird sign, it told researchers that the order mattered. Of course, it doesn't immediately tell you why. Does jarfish mean prepare the fish? The fish is in the jar, or Mr. Jar, son of Mrs. Fische, was here. Statistics are great at showing you the what, but the why often remains tantalizingly out of reach without further clues. Positional analysis has also been crucial. Researchers meticulously noted which signs tend to appear at the beginning of an inscription, which ones prefer the middle, and which ones are usually found at the end. Many scripts have specific signs or types of signs that function as prefixes or suffixes, or markers for the start or end of a phrase or name. The Indus script shows distinct patterns here too, with certain signs being overwhelmingly terminal appearing at the end, or initial. This helps to segment the short inscriptions into potential words or phrases, even if their meaning is unknown. It's like looking at a sentence in a language you don't know and being able to say, okay, based on how these symbols are arranged, this bit here is probably one unit of meaning, and that bit is another. Now for a quirky, more abstract tidbit, the concept of entropy from information theory has been applied to the Indus script. Entropy, in this context, is a measure of the randomness or predictability of a sequence of symbols. A highly random sequence has high entropy. A very patterned, predictable sequence has low entropy. Studies comparing the entropy of Indus inscriptions to known linguistic scripts like Sumerian or Egyptian and non-linguistic symbol systems like heraldic emblems or potter's marks have found that the Indus script's entropy value falls squarely in the range of linguistic scripts. This provides strong mathematical evidence that it's not just a collection of random squiggles or purely symbolic icons, but that it does indeed encode structured, language-like information. You can almost hear the computers whirring and then confidently declaring, "Yep, smells like language to me," even if it can't translate a single fish. While statistical analyses strongly suggest the script encodes language and can reveal its internal structure, there's ongoing discussion about how much these patterns can tell us about the type of language e.g. its grammatical structure like Dravidian agglutination versus Indo-Aryan inflection in the absence of phonetic decipherment. For example, if you find that certain signs behave like suffixes, that's a structural clue. Proponents of the Dravidian theory, like Asko Parpala, whom we mentioned earlier, have used these statistical patterns of sign order to argue that they are consistent with Dravidian grammatical structures. Other researchers might interpret the same patterns differently or argue they are not specific enough to pinpoint one language family over another. These computational methods are a bit like modern data science or forensic linguistics being applied to an ancient mystery. They can't give you the full story on their own, but they can highlight key features, rule out some possibilities, and point investigators in promising directions. They provide a framework, a skeleton of the language, even if the flesh and blood, the actual sounds and meanings, are still missing. And as the corpus of known inscriptions slowly grows with new discoveries, and as computational tools become even more powerful, these statistical approaches will undoubtedly continue to wring out every last drop of structural information from those stubbornly silent signs. It's a slow, methodical chipping away at the mystery. One percentage point, one sign frequency table at a time. You've been navigating the rather abstract world of statistical analysis and computational methods in our last section. Watching how numbers and patterns can squeeze out secrets from silent stones? It's fascinating stuff. Like watching a detective build a case from tiny, almost invisible clues. But now, let's bring our focus back to something much more tangible. Something you can almost reach out and touch the images on the Indus seals themselves. And specifically, the most enigmatic and frequently depicted creature of them all, and the so-called unicorn. Remember when we first encountered those little steatite seals back in Section 2? Those miniature masterpieces, each bearing an animal and a line of script. Well, if you were to spread out all the thousands of Indus seals that have been discovered, one image would appear more than any other. It's not an elephant, nor a tiger, nor even the powerful bull, though those are all present. No, the undisputed superstar of the Indus seal world is a creature that looks remarkably like a unicorn. This is a solid mainstream historical fact. This unicorn motif is found on over 60%, some say even up to 70%, of all known Indus seals. It's the ancient equivalent of a chart-topping hit that just never leaves the airwaves. Now, when I say unicorn, you might picture the glittery, rainbow-maned creature from fantasy tales. The Indus version is a bit more stoic. It's typically depicted in profile, a sturdy, somewhat bovine or equine body, with a single, long, often slightly curved horn projecting from its forehead. It usually has a rather elaborate collar or harness around its neck, and its expression is generally quite placid, almost regal. It always looks so serious, as if it's contemplating the quarterly tax returns for the entire Indus Valley civilization. The carving is often exquisite, showing a real mastery of miniature art. But is it truly a mythical, one-horned beast? This is where the debate begins. Some scholars suggest that it might be an artistic convention for depicting an animal that actually has two horns. If you view a bull or an aurochs, a large wild ox that existed in the region at the time, in strict profile, one horn can neatly obscure the other. So, perhaps it's not a fantasy creature at all, but a realistic portrayal of a powerful animal, stylized in a particular way. This is certainly plausible, especially given the Harappan's generally naturalistic depictions of other animals like elephants and zebu bulls where both horns or tusks are clearly shown when the angle allows. Adding to the mystery is a peculiar object almost always shown standing in front of the unicorn. This item is often referred to as a ritual stand, a sacred brazier, a filter, or sometimes, more whimsically, an incense burner or even an ancient bird bath. It typically consists of a lower, cage-like or basin-like structure, a central post, and an upper bowl or platform, often with wavy lines or projections coming from it. Its exact nature is a puzzle. Was it used in religious ceremonies? Did it hold offerings? Or sacred fire? Or perhaps a liquid that was filtered through it as part of some ritual? Some have even suggested it could be a representation of a soma filter. Soma being a ritual drink mentioned in the later Vedic texts, though that's a highly debated connection. Is it a sophisticated Bronze Age espresso machine? Probably not. But its constant association with the unicorn tells us they were a package deal, a symbolic pairing of great importance. The precise meaning and function of the unicorn and its accompanying ritual stand remain one of an archaeologist's favorite water cooler topics, with theories ranging from a representation of a deity, a totemic symbol of a powerful clan or lineage, to an emblem of a state authority or an economic guild. If you owned a seal with this prominent image, what did it signify? Were you a member of the unicorn clan, an official of a particular state department, or perhaps it was a more general symbol of power, prosperity, or ritual purity? A quirky tidbit for you: some researchers have delved into the idea that the unicorn wasn't just one specific entity but could represent a composite concept or a powerful ruling elite. Given its prevalence, it certainly seems to have been a widely recognized and authoritative symbol. Perhaps different variations in the depiction of the unicorn or the stand held subtle clues to different subgroups or ranks within this overarching unicorn sphere of influence. The sheer number of these seals, which form a massive data set for the kind of statistical analysis we discussed in Section 8, means that even tiny variations can be tracked and studied for potential patterns. And, of course, hovering above this iconic image, in that neat right-to-left line, is the script. The tantalizing question is, what does the script say in relation to the unicorn? Is it the name of the seal owner, their title or profession, a dedication to the deity or spirit represented by the unicorn, or perhaps a motto or charm associated with the symbol? If we could just read those few signs, a huge piece of the Indus ideological puzzle might click into place. The script and the image are clearly linked, presented together on these small but potent objects. Unlocking one could help unlock the other. Imagine a Harappan official, perhaps a merchant or a city administrator, pressing their personal unicorn seal into a soft clay tag attached to a bale of goods, or onto a document if they used perishable ones that haven't survived. That impression, with its crisp unicorn, its mysterious stand, and its line of unread symbols, carried authority. It was a mark of identity, of control, of belonging to whatever system this unicorn represented. It's like a very official, very ancient logo, more ubiquitous than any swoosh or bitten apple today. If the Harappans had only left us a little note, a beginner's guide to Indus iconography, saying, "This is Bob the unicorn. He's our official mascot, and this thing in front of him is where he keeps his sacred barley snacks," it would have saved us millennia of very enjoyable but ultimately frustrating head-scratching. But they didn't. So, the unicorn remains there, a silent sentinel on thousands of seals, its single horn pointing towards a world of belief and social structure that we can only glimpse. It stands as a potent reminder of how much of this civilization's inner life, its myths, its power structures, its very identity, is still wrapped in profound mystery. A mystery embodied in this elegant, ubiquitous, and utterly enigmatic creature. You've been wrestling with the enigmatic unicorn and its ever-present, mysterious stand in the last section, pondering what such a dominant symbol on those Indus seals might actually signify. It's a potent image, for sure. But an image, or even a line of script, can float in a void of meaning if you don't know where it came from or how it was used. This is where the trowel and brush brigade comes in. The archaeologists who meticulously unearth not just the artifacts, but the stories their surroundings tell. Today, we're diving into the crucial role of archaeological context, because knowing where those inscribed objects were found is just as important as the symbols themselves. Imagine you're on an archaeological dig in the dusty plains where Harappa or Mohenjo-daro once thrived. The sun is beating down, the air is still, and you're carefully, painstakingly, scraping away layers of earth that have accumulated over 4,500 years. Suddenly, your trowel hits something small and hard. It's a seal. Maybe even one of those unicorn seals we just talked about. Your heart does a little leap, but an archaeologist's next thought isn't just, wow, a unicorn. It's, where exactly is it? What's around it? What layer is it in? This is context, and it's king. Finding an Indus seal in what appears to be a Viking longhouse in Norway would, contextually speaking, break a few brains and probably rewrite a whole lot of history books. Or, more likely, be dismissed as a very lost tourist. The context of an artifact is everything that surrounds it in the ground. The type of soil, its position relative to structures like walls or floors, and what other objects it's found with. Is our unicorn seal found in the rubble of a collapsed house near a hearth, alongside tools used for bead making or perhaps in a public area near a city gate? Each detail adds a crucial layer to its potential interpretation. It's like detective work at an ancient crime scene. The position of every clue matters. You wouldn't just bag up a mysterious note at a crime scene without documenting precisely where it was found and what else was nearby. Would you? A really significant mainstream historical fact derived from contextual analysis is that most Indus seals and inscribed objects have been discovered in urban settings, often within what seem to be residential areas and craft workshops. Remember those well-planned cities from Section 1? We're talking about the houses with their courtyards and drains, or areas where pottery was fired, beads were drilled, or shell was cut. They are less commonly found in association with monumental structures that scream palace or grand temple, mostly because, as we've noted, such obviously elite buildings are surprisingly rare in the Indus Valley civilization. This suggests a more decentralized, widespread use of seals, perhaps for managing trade, authenticating goods, or for personal identification by a broader segment of the population, not just a tiny ruling elite. It hints at a society where administration and economic activity were woven into the fabric of daily urban life. Now, for a quirky tidbit related to context occasionally, archaeologists hit a sort of jackpot. A cluster of seals or inscribed tablets found together in a single room or a specific contained area. Such a find can set imaginations racing. Could this have been an ancient administrative office where records were kept and transactions were stamped? Perhaps it was a merchant's house where they stored their seals and a collection of clay tags from goods received? The famous granaries at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, those massive brick structures whose exact function is still debated, were they for grain or something else, have yielded seals in their vicinity, hinting at some form of administrative control over whatever commodities were being stored or processed there. And then there's the unique find from Dolavira, that large signboard with about 10 large Indus signs which had fallen from a gateway. Its context clearly suggests it was a public inscription, meant to be seen by many. Imagine the excitement of finding that knowing it was once a prominent feature of the cityscape. Archaeologists continue to debate the precise function of specific find spots. For instance, was that room with 20 seals and a bunch of broken pottery a local trade regulation office, a tax collection point, or simply the cluttered workshop of a rather messy but prolific seal carver who kept his inventory and his lunch scraps in the same place? One Harappan's disorganized storeroom could be another archaeologist's ritual deposit if we're not careful. This is where careful recording and interpretation become an art as much as a science. Was this oddly shaped pottery shard with a single incised fish sign a ritual offering vessel? A child's first attempt at writing? Or just something the Harappan equivalent of Fido the dog gnawed on before it got thrown in the ancient trash context? People. Context. Think about the different types of inscribed objects we've discussed. Those beautiful steatite seals like the unicorn ones, the small copper tablets, and the markings on pottery. Their find spots can tell us different things. If seals, which were used for making impressions, are found alongside clay tags, the impressions themselves, it strongly supports their role in the trade and administration. If inscribed pottery is found mainly in domestic areas, it might relate to household accounting, labeling of contents, or even personal names. Those little copper tablets, often with script on both sides, are a bit more mysterious. Their context hasn't always been as clear-cut, leading to speculation they might have been amulets or tokens with a more personal or ritualistic significance. The location within a city can also be telling. Are inscribed objects found more frequently in the citadel mounds the higher? Western parts of cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, often thought to be administrative or religious centers, or in the lower towns where most people lived and worked. The distribution can give us clues about literacy levels, or at least access to and use of the script across different social strata or functional areas of the city. If nearly every house yields a seal or two, that paints a very different picture of script usage than if they're only found in a few select buildings. So, when you picture those Indus symbols, don't just see them floating in isolation. See them as they were found perhaps embedded in the compacted earth of a Harappan street, nestled amongst the ruins of a craftsman's workshop, or lying near the gateway of a once bustling city. Each piece of information about its archaeological find spot is a thread, and when woven together, these threads can help us reconstruct the fabric of the society that created and used this enigmatic script. Without that context, we're just looking at pretty patterns. With it, we're one step closer to understanding their world. You've been navigating the meticulous world of archaeological context with us in the last section, understanding how the where and what with of an artifact, like an Indus seal, can be as revealing as the object itself. It's all about careful observation and deduction. But what happens when the objects themselves are, let's say, less than honest? Or when the interpretations offered are more creative writing than careful scholarship? Yes, you guessed it. We're now venturing into the shadowy, sometimes frustrating, and occasionally hilarious world of fakes, forgeries, and outright fantasies surrounding the Indus script. Whenever you have artifacts of great antiquity and mystery, especially those connected to a lost language, you inevitably attract a certain amount of, shall we call it, unconventional attention. This can range from outright criminal activity, the creation of forgeries for profit, to well-meaning but ultimately misguided attempts at decipherment that owe more to vivid imagination than to rigorous methodology. It's like how any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Any sufficiently ancient and undeciphered script seems to be indistinguishable from a blank canvas for people's wildest theories. Let's start with the fakes. As the significance and market value of Indus artifacts grew, especially in the 20th century, it was almost inevitable that fakes would start to appear. Crafty individuals, then as now, might try to produce their own ancient seals or inscribed objects to sell to unsuspecting collectors, or even, sometimes, to try and fool museums or scholars. Imagine a forger hunched over a piece of soapstone, meticulously trying to replicate those tiny Indus signs and perhaps a rather wobbly version of that unicorn we talked so much about. Maybe they'd even try to add a little inscription on the back, "Made in Harappa," not really distinguishing between a genuine, albeit unusual, Indus artifact and a clever modern forgery often involves intense scrutiny and debate among experts. This is where all that knowledge of authentic materials, carving techniques, stylistic conventions, and, crucially, archaeological context comes into play. A mainstream historical fact is that forgeries of Indus artifacts, including seals with inscriptions, have indeed surfaced over the years. Experts use a battery of tests. Is the steatite, the soapstone typically used, geologically consistent with sources known to have been used by the Harappans? Are the carving techniques similar? The depth of incision, the tool's marks or lack thereof? Does the style of the animal or the script signs look right? Or are there awkward anachronisms? And, very importantly, does it have a documented provenance? A clear history of where it was excavated by professional archaeologists? An object that just magically appears on the art market with no backstory immediately raises red flags. Remember how important context was in our last discussion. Forgeries, by their very nature, lack genuine archaeological context. A particularly interesting and quirky case that illustrates the complexities here is the controversy around alleged horse seals. The presence or absence of the horse in the Indus Valley civilization is a hot-button issue, often linked to debates about the origins and arrival of Indo-Aryan speakers who are strongly associated with horses. Occasionally, seals depicting horse-like animals have surfaced, with some proponents claiming them as proof of horses in the IVC. However, most experts view these with extreme skepticism. The animals are often ambiguously carved. Is it a horse, or a different equid, or just a poorly rendered bull? Or the style of the seal and script seems off, or the object lacks any reliable find context. The infamous Mohenjo-Daro horse seal, for instance, is widely considered by serious scholars to be either a misidentification from a much later period or an outright forgery, perhaps created to fuel a particular historical narrative. It shows how fakes can be more than just a financial scam. They can be attempts to hijack history. Then we move from physical fakes to intellectual fantasies, the realm of decipherments that owe more to wishful thinking than to scientific method. Since the script's discovery, there has been no shortage of enthusiastic individuals, often working outside the academic mainstream, who have proclaimed, "Eureka! I've cracked it." These claims often make for exciting headlines, but tend to unravel under scrutiny. Remember S.L. A. Waddell from Section 4 who tried to read the script as Sumerian and found a whole lost history of Aryan kings. His was an early example, but the tradition continues. You'll find decipherments that claim the Indus script is really an early form of Greek, or that it's related to the Easter Island script Rongorongo, or that it holds the secrets of Atlantis, or that it proves ancient astronauts visited the Indus Valley. Yes, if you can think of a popular fringe theory, someone has probably tried to connect it to the Indus script. One almost expects a decipherment claiming a fish, a jar, and a stick figure clearly translates to ancient aliens built the pyramids. And for more information, please buy my self-published book. What these fantastical decipherments usually have in common is a lack of rigorous methodology. They might pick a few signs that look vaguely like letters from a known alphabet, assign them those phonetic values, and then creatively read inscriptions in a way that supports their preconceived theory. There's often no consistent application of rules, no statistical validation, and no attempt to account for the entire corpus of signs or the grammatical structure that statistical analyses which we discussed in Section 8 suggest. The translations often produce sensational results, grand historical narratives, profound philosophical insights, or prophecies far removed from the likely mundane content names, titles, commodities, short administrative records of most seals from other ancient civilizations. It's a bit like seeing faces in clouds or patterns in toast. The human brain is wired to find meaning and patterns, even where none exist. And when you combine that with an unsolved mystery like the Indus script, the allure of being the one to solve it can sometimes overpower critical thinking. If someone, perhaps even today as I'm recording this on May 19th, 2025 claimed an Indus seal perfectly predicted last week's lottery numbers from here in Hanoi, it'd probably get a flurry of shares on social media, even if the seal in question was clearly carved on a piece of last night's leftover bread. This isn't to say that all non-mainstream ideas are worthless, or that breakthroughs can't come from unexpected places. But for a decipherment to be taken seriously by the scholarly community, it needs to be systematic, testable, and able to explain a significant portion of the available data in a consistent manner. It needs to build upon or convincingly refute the careful work done by generations of epigraphers, archaeologists, and linguists. So, as you continue your sleepy journey into the heart of this ancient puzzle, keep a discerning eye. The genuine mystery of the Indus script is fascinating enough on its own. It doesn't need embellishment with modern fakes or fantastical interpretations. The real story, locked in those tiny symbols, is waiting to be teased out through patient research, careful analysis, and perhaps one day a genuine breakthrough that stands up to the toughest scrutiny. Until then, the fakes and fantasies serve as a useful, if sometimes distracting, reminder of the human capacity for both deception and boundless imagination. You've just navigated the murky waters of fakes, forgeries, and fantastical interpretations in our last discussion. Learning how easy it is for wishful thinking or deliberate deception to cloud the already challenging quest to understand the Indus script. It underscores the need for rigor and solid evidence. And speaking of solid evidence, there's one particular type of artifact that, more than any other, acts as a magical key for unlocking lost languages. It's the holy grail for decipherers, the ultimate linguistic treasure map, a bilingual text. For the Indus script, its most profound and frustrating characteristic is the complete and utter absence of such a key. There is, alas, no Indus Rosetta Stone. Now, what exactly is a Rosetta Stone? And why is its absence so critical? You've probably heard the name. The original Rosetta Stone, a fragmented stele of black granodiorite, was discovered in Egypt by French soldiers in 1799. Its incredible importance lies in the fact that it bears the same decree inscribed in three scripts, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs which were then undeciphered. Demotic script, another form of Egyptian writing, and, crucially, ancient Greek, which scholars could read. This trilingual inscription became the cornerstone for the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs, most famously by Jean-François Champollion in the 1820s, with significant contributions from Thomas Young and others. By comparing the known Greek text with the unknown hieroglyphic portions, especially royal names enclosed in cartouches, scholars could slowly piece together the phonetic values and meanings of the hieroglyphs. It was like having an instruction manual and an answer key all in one. Imagine the scene for centuries. Egyptian hieroglyphs were beautiful but mute symbols. Scholars could admire their artistry but had little idea of the rich history, literature, and daily life they recorded. Then, boom, the Rosetta Stone provides that vital bridge. It's the linguistic equivalent of finding a universal translator in an alien spacecraft. Now, shift your focus back to the Indus Valley. Thousands of inscriptions, those neat little lines of script above the unicorns and bulls. On copper tablets, on pottery, but not a single one has yet been found that has a parallel translation into a known, deciphered language. There's no Harappan cuneiform, no Indus Egyptian parallel text. It's like having a library full of locked books, and the one key that could open them all is missing. This is, without a doubt, the single biggest obstacle to deciphering the Indus script. It's why. Despite all the clever statistical analysis we talked about in Section 8, and despite the compelling linguistic theories like the Dravidian hypothesis from Section 6, we still can't definitively read what those Harappans wrote. It's like trying to learn a complex programming language with absolutely no documentation, no tutorials, just lines of code. Good luck figuring out what Unicorn Protocol Lock 7 Fish Array actually does. The lack of a bilingual text means that decipherment attempts for the Indus script have to rely on internal analysis, studying the patterns within the script itself, and on making educated guesses about the underlying language family. It's a much harder, much more speculative process. Couldn't those Harappans have been a bit more considerate? Just a little clay tablet saying, by the way, this fish sign means mun, and here's the same word in Sumerian for our trading partners. So thoughtless of them. Really. Not to anticipate the headaches they'd cause for archaeologists 4,500 years later. Now, for a quirky tidbit, or perhaps more accurately, a glimmer of desperate hope the Indus people were not isolates. We know from archaeological evidence, like Indus seals found in Mesopotamian cities and Mesopotamian goods found in Indus sites, that there was significant trade and contact between the Indus Valley civilization and contemporary cultures in the Persian Gulf and Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. The languages of Mesopotamia, like Sumerian and Akkadian written in cuneiform script, have been deciphered. So, the dream, the long shot that keeps some researchers going, is that somewhere in the dusty archives of a Mesopotamian city, or perhaps in the ruins of an ancient trading outpost in Bahrain, ancient Dilmun, a known trading partner, a bilingual Indus cuneiform tablet might one day be unearthed. Archaeologists are practically searching every ancient Mesopotamian flea market, metaphorically speaking, for an Indus script for dummies tablet. Just one seal, one tablet, one tiny fragment with a few corresponding words in both scripts could provide that crucial breakthrough, that first secure foothold. A few Indus seals have indeed been found in Mesopotamian contexts, which is incredibly exciting. But so far, frustratingly, none of them have been bilingual. They are typically standard Indus seals that presumably arrived with traders or goods, tantalizingly close but offering no direct translation. There have been occasional false alarms, objects initially thought to be bilingual that turned out to be something else, adding to the roller coaster of hope and disappointment. While most scholars acknowledge the immense difficulty, some would say near impossibility, of a full linguistic decipherment without a bilingual key. There's still a spectrum of optimism. Some believe that continued internal analysis, more sophisticated computational methods, and perhaps new archaeological discoveries, even if not a full bilingual, might eventually allow us to understand the general meaning of certain signs or the function of certain types of inscriptions. Others are more pessimistic, maintaining that true decipherment, being able to read and understand the nuances of the language, remains highly unlikely without that Rosetta Stone equivalent. If a bilingual text were ever found, say, even as I speak to you now on this Monday evening, May 19th, 2025, from here in Hanoi, the news would electrify the world of archaeology and linguistics overnight. Champagne corks would be popping in university departments globally. Until that hypothetical day, the absence of a bilingual text shapes the entire field of Indus script research. It forces a reliance on indirect methods, on probabilities rather than certainties, and on building elaborate chains of inference that are always vulnerable to new evidence or alternative interpretations. It means that every proposed reading, every suggested linguistic affiliation, carries a heavy burden of proof that is almost impossible to meet definitively. The silence of the script, which we've often talked about, feels all the more profound because of this missing key. If a bilingual text were found, knowing our luck with ancient discoveries, it would probably turn out to be a very mundane tax receipt. Something like received 3 goats and a measure of barley for the annual unicorn parking fee. P.S. Hieroglyphs are cool, but our script is way more efficient. Still, even a tax receipt would be priceless. So, the search continues, not just for more inscriptions, but for that one special inscription that speaks in 2 tongues. It's a testament to the enduring human desire to connect with the past, to hear the voices of those who came before us, even when they have done their level best, albeit unintentionally, to make it as difficult as humanly possible. You've been on quite a journey with us, grappling with the profound frustration of not having an Indus Rosetta Stone, that magical bilingual key we discussed in the last section. Its absence looms large over every attempt to understand those enigmatic symbols. But the mystery of the Indus script doesn't just lie in its undeciphered nature, it also encompasses its eventual disappearance. Like a flickering flame. This unique form of writing, once used across a vast civilization, eventually dwindled and died out. How did this happen? To answer that, we need to look at the broader decline of the Indus Valley civilization itself. Remember those magnificent, well-ordered cities we explored way back in Section 1 Harappa? Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, bustling metropolises with their sophisticated drainage, standardized bricks, and thriving trade networks. For centuries, this was a world of remarkable stability and cultural cohesion. A world where those little seals with their animal motifs and lines of script played a vital, if still mysterious, role. But nothing lasts forever. Starting around 1900 BCE, this vibrant urban culture began to unravel. This is a mainstream historical fact. The period from roughly 1900 BCE to 1300 BCE witnessed the gradual decline and eventual abandonment of these great urban centers. And with them, the fading of the characteristic Indus script and the traditions it represented. Imagine yourself walking through Mohenjo-Daro not in its prime, but in its twilight years. The once meticulous city planning starts to break down. New constructions are shoddier, built over crumbling older structures. Drains become clogged and are no longer maintained with the same civic pride. The standardized weights and measures, once a hallmark of their integrated economy, become less common. The beautiful, intricately carved seals become rarer, and the quality of the carving perhaps diminishes. The script itself, that unique system of communication, begins to fall out of use. You might see fewer inscribed objects, the sequences of signs becoming shorter, or perhaps more haphazard. It's like watching a complex machine slowly grind to a halt, its various interconnected parts failing one by one. So, what caused this system crash? This is one of the great debates in South Asian archaeology. The exact interplay and relative importance of factors like climate change, particularly shifts in monsoon patterns, tectonic activity altering river courses, internal societal stresses, or the arrival of new cultural groups remain a subject of intense scholarly investigation and disagreement. There's no single universally accepted culprit. It was likely a perfect storm of multiple converging pressures. One of the most prominent theories points to environmental factors. The Indus civilization was heavily reliant on its great rivers. The Indus and the Gagar, often identified with the mythical Sarasvati River. Evidence suggests that around the beginning of the second millennium BCE, significant climatic shifts occurred. Monsoons may have become weaker or more erratic, impacting agriculture, which was the bedrock of their economy. Rivers changed their courses. The Gagar, for instance, appears to have largely dried up due to a combination of tectonic uplift at its source and reduced rainfall. Imagine the lifeblood of your civilization dwindling, your fields becoming parched, your trade routes disrupted. For a society so dependent on water and predictable agriculture, these would have been catastrophic blows. It's a sobering thought, especially today. May 19th, 2025, as we here in Hanoi and globally grapple with our own concerns about climate change and resource management. Some problems, it seems, are tragically timeless. Other theories focus on internal factors. Perhaps there were socio-political upheavals, a breakdown in the administrative or religious structures that had maintained cohesion across such a vast territory. Maybe trade networks collapsed, not just due to environmental issues, but also due to shifts in demand from far-off places like Mesopotamia. Some have suggested resource depletion, deforestation for firing those millions of bricks. For example, I could have had long-term environmental consequences. The once popular theory of an Aryan invasion violently overthrowing the Indus cities has largely been discredited by modern archaeology, as there's little evidence of widespread warfare or destruction layers at most sites dating to this period of decline. However, the arrival and gradual assimilation of new cultural groups, perhaps Indo-Aryan speakers migrating from the northwest, could have contributed to the transformation of the existing social and linguistic landscape over time, but more as a complex interaction than a sudden conquest. As the cities declined, so too did the specific needs that the script presumably served. If it was used for trade administration, and trade networks were fragmenting, its utility would diminish. If it was used for elite displays of identity or ritual purposes tied to the urban centers, its importance would wane as those centers lost their prominence. It's like asking why people stopped using slide rules once pocket calculators became common. The technology, or in this case, the socio-economic system that supported the script, simply moved on or broke down. Maybe they just got tired of painstakingly carving all those tiny fish and jar symbols onto steatite and decided that verbal agreements, or perhaps simpler marking systems on perishable materials, were the next big thing. A bit like ditching formal calligraphy for quick text messages. Now, for a quirky aspect of this decline, the localization or regionalization phase, often called the late Harappan period. As the large integrated urban system fractured, different regions developed their own distinct local cultures. Some Indus traditions continued in modified forms, but the unifying features like the script, the highly standardized weights, and those iconic seals largely disappeared. For example, the Jukar culture, which succeeded the mature Harappan in parts of Sindh, showed some ceramic continuities but had a different, cruder type of seal and lacked the Indus script. It's as if the grand symphony of the Indus civilization broke down into smaller, local folk tunes. Were there populations who migrated away from the drying river valleys, perhaps carrying with them fragmented memories of the script or elements of their language, to other parts of India? This is a tantalizing possibility, though hard to trace archaeologically. It's a classic case of a civilization not leaving a "we're moving please forward our mail to the Ganges plain" note for future archaeologists. The script didn't just vanish overnight. It was a slow fade, like a photograph losing its color over centuries. Perhaps the last few scribes in a dwindling city carved the last few seals, their knowledge of the full repertoire of signs and their meanings becoming increasingly tenuous. Maybe the final inscriptions were just rote repetitions of older formulas, their original significance lost. And then, one day, the last person who could read or write those symbols died, and the script fell completely silent, its secrets locked away until its rediscovery thousands of years later. The lack of a Rosetta Stone, as we've lamented, means we can't even look for textual clues within the script itself that might hint at the reasons for its decline. No sorrowful odes to drying rivers or panicked administrative notes about failing granaries. The silence is complete. So, the decline of the Indus script is inextricably linked to the decline of the civilization that birthed it. It's a poignant reminder that writing systems, no matter how sophisticated, are tools created and sustained by living societies. When the society transforms or disappears, its unique tools can be lost as well, leaving behind a beautiful, frustrating, and utterly compelling puzzle for us to ponder. You've journeyed with us through the poignant decline of the Indus civilization and its script in the previous section, feeling that slow fade as cities were abandoned and a unique writing system slipped into silence. It's a somber chapter in our story, but the human fascination with unsolved mysteries is a powerful and resilient thing. Just because the Harappans packed up their unicorns and left without a forwarding address doesn't mean we've given up. In fact, today, armed with new tools, fresh perspectives, and a global network of researchers, the quest to understand the Indus script is buzzing with a new kind of energy. This is where modern technology meets an ancient puzzle. Remember those early statistical analyses we talked about in Section 8, where scholars painstakingly counted signs by hand or used relatively basic computers? Well, fast forward to today, May 19th, 2025. The kind of computational power available to researchers now would have seemed like science fiction to those pioneers. A mainstream historical fact of modern Indus script research is the creation of comprehensive, publicly accessible digital databases of all known inscriptions. Scholars like the late Brian K. Wells or Ascoparpola, among others, have dedicated immense effort to meticulously cataloging every seal, every tablet, every pottery graffito, standardizing the sign list, and making this data available online. This means researchers anywhere in the world, perhaps even someone listening to this right now here in Hanoi or in a bustling lab in Stanford, can access and analyze the entire corpus of Indus text with a few clicks. This digitalization has paved the way for sophisticated machine learning and artificial intelligence approaches. AI algorithms are being trained on these vast datasets to identify subtle patterns, correlations, and structural features that might be invisible to the human eye or too complex to compute manually. Imagine an AI sifting through thousands of those short inscriptions, looking for recurring sequences, grammatical markers, or connections between specific signs and the imagery on the seals like that ubiquitous unicorn. It's not about the AI suddenly reading the script, but about it helping to map out its underlying structure with unprecedented detail. After analyzing 10,000 fish signs, an AI might conclude, hypothesis fish is either a crucial dietary staple, a divine symbol, or possibly the Harappan equivalent of a comma. More data and perhaps some digital crackers required. While AI and advanced computational tools offer powerful new ways to analyze the script, there's an ongoing discussion about whether these methods alone can lead to decipherment without new linguistic keys, like that elusive Rosetta Stone we discussed in Section 12, or significant archaeological breakthroughs that provide more concrete context. AI is a tool, a very powerful one, but it generally needs something to learn from. If the underlying language remains unknown, AI can help define the grammar of the script, but it can't magically tell us what the words mean or what sounds the signs represent. Beyond the purely computational, new imaging technologies are also shedding fresh light on the artifacts themselves. This is where our quirky tidbit for this section comes in techniques like 3D laser scanning and reflectance transformation. Imaging RTI, RTI is particularly cool. It involves taking multiple photographs of an object with light coming from different angles. Specialized software then combines these images, allowing researchers to manipulate the virtual light source on a computer screen and see surface details in incredible relief. This can reveal minute carving techniques, differentiate between intentional script signs and accidental scratches or wear, and help clarify the shapes of worn or damaged symbols. It's like having a super magnifying glass that can also change the lighting conditions at will, helping to create much more accurate transcriptions of the inscriptions, which is fundamental for any analysis. Some research projects even explore citizen science, where interested members of the public can help classify sign variants or transcribe inscriptions from these high-resolution images, democratizing the research process a bit. Modern research is also increasingly interdisciplinary. It's no longer just a lone linguist or archaeologist working in isolation. Today, you'll find teams composed of archaeologists, linguists, epigraphers, computer scientists, statisticians, and even material scientists working together. You might have one expert analyzing the chemical composition of the steatite used for seals, another examining the archaeological context of their discovery, a third running sophisticated algorithms on the sign sequences, and a fourth comparing potential linguistic structures. It's like the Avengers, but for ancient scripts, each member bringing their unique superpower to bear on the problem. This collaborative approach, often spanning multiple institutions and countries, allows for a more holistic attack on the problem. Fresh perspectives are also emerging from comparative studies with other undeciphered or partially deciphered scripts, or from a deeper understanding of how early writing systems evolved in other parts of the world. For instance, understanding the functional constraints on early administrative scripts, what they needed to record names, quantities, places, titles, can help narrow down the possibilities for the Indus script. If most short administrative texts in other early civilizations were, say, predominantly lists of nouns and numbers, it makes it less likely that every Indus seal inscription is a complex philosophical poem. Despite all this new technology and collaborative brainpower, the Indus script still holds its secrets tight. Progress is often incremental. A tiny clarification here, a new statistical probability there. With all these advanced tools, you'd almost expect an Indus to English app to be just around the corner. But nope. The Harappans, with their elegantly carved symbols, are still playing remarkably hard to get. The lack of that bilingual key remains the fundamental bottleneck. However, the hope is that these new two, and so you find yourself at the quiet edge of our long exploration, having journeyed from the grand, orderly cities of the Indus Valley, through the discovery of its enigmatic script, the frustrating attempts at decipherment, the debates over its language, the rise of new technologies, and the poignant silence of its decline. We've peered at unicorns, pondered over fish signs, and felt the immense absence of a Rosetta Stone. Now, as the dust settles on our journey for tonight, we reflect on why this script, after more than a century of dedicated research, remains such a profound and lingering enigma, and what its enduring mystery means for us. The Indus script stands as one of the world's major undeciphered writing systems, a mainstream historical fact that underscores its unique challenge. Its decipherment would not just be an intellectual triumph, it would fundamentally reshape our understanding of early South Asian history, linguistics, and the very trajectory of human civilization in this part of the world. But the reasons for its stubborn silence are manifold, a convergence of difficult factors we've touched upon throughout our sleepy narrative. First and foremost, as we lamented in Section 12, is the glaring lack of a bilingual or multilingual key. Without that parallel text in a known language, scholars are working with one hand tied behind their backs, relying on internal analysis and educated, but ultimately unconfirmed, linguistic hypotheses. Then there's the nature of the inscriptions themselves. As we saw back in Section 3, they are overwhelmingly short, typically just a handful of signs. This brevity provides very little contextual data for linguistic analysis. Imagine trying to understand English from a collection of Twitter handles or very short street signs. You might grasp some conventions, but the full richness of the language would elude you. Furthermore, the underlying language, or languages, that the script encoded remains unknown. While the Dravidian hypothesis Section 6 has strong support, and other contenders like Indo-Aryan Section 7 have their advocates, definitive proof is missing. If the Indus language belongs to an extinct family with no known relatives, that language X scenario, the task becomes exponentially harder. And the script itself, with its several hundred unique signs and complex use of ligatures, suggests a system more complex than a simple alphabet, likely a logosyllabic script, Section 5, which inherently presents more variables to solve for the decline of the civilization itself. As we explored in Section 13 also played a cruel trick on future decipherers. The script faded out with the cities, meaning its period of use was finite, and it didn't evolve into or get replaced by a clearly related deciphered script that could offer clues backwards in time. The Harappans, it seems, were the ultimate puzzle masters, perhaps unintentionally. They're probably having a good laugh in the great beyond. Maybe here on May 19th, 2025, looking down from their celestial Harappa and watching us tie ourselves in linguistic knots over what might have been, for all we know, incredibly complex instructions for assembling their elegant, but presumably flat-pack furniture? Now, for a quirky and rather provocative tidbit that highlights the depth of the enigma, there's a minority scholarly view. Advanced by figures like Steve Farmer, Richard Sproat, and Michael Witzel, suggesting that the Indus script might not be a true linguistic script at all. They argue that it might instead be a non-linguistic symbolic system, akin to heraldic emblems, religious symbols, or perhaps astronomical markers, capable of conveying limited information but not of representing full spoken language. This theory points to the brevity of the text, the frequent repetition of certain signs, especially on seals, and the lack of expected linguistic features found in other early scripts. While this view is not widely accepted by the majority of researchers who believe the script does encode language supported by statistical analyses of sign order and entropy, as we saw in Section 8, it serves as a potent reminder of how little is definitively known. If they are right, then trying to decipher it as a language would be like trying to read a coat of arms as a sentence. The ultimate question of whether the Indus script will ever be fully deciphered continues to fuel academic discourse, with opinions ranging from cautious optimism based on new methodologies like the AI and advanced imaging from Section 14 to profound skepticism given the inherent limitations of the available evidence. Just when you think you've learned a lot about the ancient world and the progress of human knowledge, the Indus script gently whispers from its tiny seals. Not so fast, buddy. Some secrets are kept for a reason, or perhaps just very, very well. Yet, the script's undeciphered state is also part of its profound legacy. It stands as a symbol of a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that achieved so much in terms of urban planning, trade, and craftsmanship, yet whose voice remains largely unheard. It lends an air of profound mystery to the Indus people. We can see their cities, touch their artifacts, admire their artistry, but we cannot fully access their thoughts, their beliefs, their stories in their own words. This very silence invites us to imagine, to speculate, to connect with them on a different level, through the tangible remains they left behind. The allure of the unknown is a powerful human motivator. The Indus script is one of history's great cold cases, a puzzle box passed down through millennia. Each new generation of researchers, from here in Hanoi to labs across the globe, brings fresh eyes, new tools, and renewed determination. And even if a full decipherment remains just beyond our grasp, the ongoing quest continues to illuminate the script's structure, the civilization that used it, and the intricate tapestry of early human history. It's a testament to our enduring need to understand our past, to connect with those who walked the earth long before us, and to listen, even to the faintest whispers from the dust. And now, as our exploration of these ancient mysteries draws to a gentle close for tonight, allow the images of those sun-baked plains and silent cities to soften in your mind. The enigmatic signs? The unicorn seals? The faint traces of a world that once pulsed with life, now rest under the quiet gaze of the stars, much as they have for countless centuries? The Indus script, with its beautiful, unread symbols, continues to guard its secrets, a gentle puzzle for the ages. There is a certain peace in knowing that some enigmas endure, inviting us to wonder and to dream, rather than to always have every answer neatly filed away. These ancient whispers, though silent in word, speak volumes about the ingenuity and the ephemeral nature of human endeavor. Let the gentle rhythm of history lull you, as the Indus Valley itself now sleeps beneath the sands of time. Perhaps in the quiet landscape of your dreams, you'll wander those ancient streets, not as a seeker of answers, but simply as a fellow traveler, feeling the warmth of a sun that shone so very long ago. Ols can refine our questions, help us recognize patterns that point towards the script's underlying linguistic family, should one of the candidates like Dravidian be correct, or even help identify the function of certain signs or sequences with greater confidence. Perhaps AI can help us distinguish more clearly between logographic, syllabic, and ideographic uses of signs, or more reliably identify ligatures and variants, which, as we discussed in Section 3, complicate the sign list. Even if a full decipherment remains elusive, these modern approaches are enriching our understanding of the script's complexity and the sophistication of the society that created it. The puzzle is old, incredibly old, but the tools we bring to it are ever newer, and the human curiosity that drives the quest is, thankfully, timeless. Sweet dreams.